Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back to me talking about Sherlock Holmes because evidently this has become a Sherlock Holmes channel at this point. I'm not complaining because, as you can probably tell, I love talking about my all-time favorite Victorian detective. And I thought about wanting to talk about, some Sherlock Holmes facts, trivia, history kind of stuff for a while, but I didn't really know where to start. So I came up with this idea. I thought I'm going to talk about some facts about Sherlock Holmes since he is such a famous character and person. That there have been many stories and mysteries surrounding his person that many people believe simply because these facts are so popular or so ingrained in our cultural understanding of this character that many people believe them to be true, even though they are not. So I thought about today. I'm gonna tell you a couple of facts that everyone seems to believe about Sherlock Holmes, but that aren't true, technically speaking. So I'm saying technically speaking because there will be some facts on here that are widely accepted even by the Sherlock Holmes societies around the world and by the fandom, etc. But if you look at the actual canon, so the 56 short stories and the 4 novels written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, we don't actually find any of that stuff in there. So I'm going purely based on what the canon tells us, because as we will find out, a lot of the things we think we know about Sherlock Holmes or think are true don't actually appear in the canon at all and have been added to the Sherlock Holmes character over the years. So today I would like to present to you 7 facts, well, more or less 7 facts, about Sherlock Holmes that many people believe but that aren't actually true. These facts, for the more hard-boiled, hardcore Sherlock Holmes fans like me, they probably won't be anything new. But who knows? Maybe there's going to be a surprise. But this is mainly meant for people who are just curious about finding out about Sherlock Holmes, and maybe someone who wants to get into the canon and into the greater understanding of this character, and maybe this is a good introduction to sort of burst your bubble when it comes to Sherlock Holmes. But that's quite a long introduction, so let's go. Okay, so let's talk about the most famous phrase that comes to mind when someone says Sherlock Holmes, namely, elementary, my dear Watson. This sentence is so well known. It basically encapsulates this entire idea about Sherlock Holmes. If someone says, if you had to do like a very basic impression or impersonation of Sherlock Holmes, you would put on like a thinking face and say, elementary, my dear Watson. The thing is, this line was never said by Sherlock Holmes. So, yeah, the most famous line the detective is known for, the detective hasn't actually uttered in any of the stories. So, it's kind of interesting that this phrase has a very, very long history. So, this phrase, elementary, my dear Watson, already existed even by the end of the 19th century, the early 20th century already, where it had already sort of become cliche in and of itself. And it came into being most likely during the making of the Sherlock Holmes play that had been written under the creative advice of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And there are many, many different kinds of versions existed of the script at the time. And some of these scripts, or some of the actors who played Sherlock Holmes at the time, most famously, obviously, William Gillette, who played Sherlock Holmes for many, many productions. This is where we find the origins of this phrase, elementary, my dear Watson. This is probably where it was said for the first time in this play, or in some production of this play, this phrase was said, and it has entered the script. There are script versions of this play where the phrase is included, but there are also versions where the phrase isn't included. So it is still a little bit vague where the phrase actually comes from, but it was already well known even back then. So it's kind of interesting to see how long this phrase has persisted, and I guess it's because it's been around for so long that many people still associate this phrase with Sherlock Holmes, even though in none of the 60 stories from the canon this phrase has never been said. I think the closest we ever get is that sometimes Sherlock does say elementary, or he does sometimes also call Watson my dear Watson or something like that, but we never get this exact phrase, elementary, my dear Watson. That sentence is never uttered by Sherlock Holmes. It's similar to beam me up, Scotty in Star Trek is a phrase that's so well known but has never actually been uttered in the series. Elementary, my dear Watson, is probably the most famous phrase the detective has said, but hasn't actually said at all. For the second fact, let's look at the most famous depiction of Sherlock Holmes. Everyone knows the silhouette. Everyone knows that this silhouette means Sherlock Holmes. But let me tell you, this silhouette is basically sort of a lie. So what I'm trying to say here is that this image we have of Sherlock Holmes with the Deerstalker and the pipe is mostly fabricated as well. So first of all, the Deerstalker is also a symbol that just encapsulates this idea of Sherlock Holmes. We see a Deerstalker, we think Sherlock Holmes. The man doesn't even have to be there, we just look at this hat and think Sherlock Holmes. Truth is, if we look back at the stories, and at the time the stories are set, so Victorian times, the Deerstalker wasn't actually like a very common hat Sherlock would wear in the stories. So in the stories, it is sometimes mentioned that he wears something that could be described as a Deerstalker. If I look at my notes, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle sometimes describes Sherlock wearing like a close-fitting cloth cap or an ear-flapped traveling cap, which probably very likely is this type of Deerstalker hat. But this image of Sherlock Holmes wearing this hat became famous because of the illustration that Sidney Paget made. That even if you don't know this guy's name, you've probably seen some of the illustrations he's made. They are amongst the most popular and common imaginations that we have of Sherlock Holmes as a person, what he looked like, and he drew Sherlock with the Deerstalker. The thing is, this description of this kind of hat is very rare in the stories. It's all, like, we only have like 2 or 3 instances where Conan Doyle describes this kind of hat. And the second thing is, you only really wear this hat if you like go into the country. This is very much a hat that you don't wear in the city. So whenever we see Sherlock Holmes adapted in Victorian times, and it's set most of the time in London, and we see Sherlock Holmes wearing a Deerstalker hat in London, that is such a gigantic fashion faux pas. It's unimaginable. Like, you would never ever wear a Deerstalker in the city. Never, never ever. And Sherlock Holmes, someone who, even though he's flat and Baker Street is very untidy, is a man who very much pays attention to how he looks himself and always looks immaculate and very nice and tidy. He would never wear the Deerstalker hat when he's in London. And he's in London most of the time in most of these stories. So we wouldn't actually see Sherlock Holmes wear the Deerstalker hat most of the time, if at all. So maybe top hat would actually go, would fit the Sherlock Holmes character better if you think about it. And the second thing that we know, or that we associate with Sherlock Holmes when we look at this famous silhouette, is the pipe Sherlock smokes. The thing is, most of the pipes we see Sherlock Holmes smoke in like either these kinds of illustration silhouettes, or even in some annotations, is this very curvy kind of pipe that we see. But Sherlock Holmes most likely didn't smoke this kind of pipe. There are some mentions as to what kind of pipes he smokes. I'll have to look at my notes here. I leave you some of my sources I used down in the description. So this information I got from Kevin McGovern, who get all of this information, so I didn't have to go through all of the stories again. So in the canon, it's described that Sherlock smokes 3 different kinds of pipes, which is like one is a sort of black, dirty, oily clay pipe. One is an old briar, and the third one is a long cherry wood. It is much more likely Sherlock Holmes, if I because I do have a pipe. You bet I have one. Actually, no, it's my dad's, but still, I like to pretend. It's much more likely Sherlock Holmes smoked something that looked more like this, or something much more straight-lined, than this curvy pipe that we're familiar with from the silhouettes and the illustrations. Because, and this goes back again to the theatre origin, is that on stage it was much more convenient to have a more curvy pipe. Because if you imagine this kind of pipe in the theatre, it would sort of sometimes block the face, given the angle the audience would look at you. So it would also be much more easier for the actor to have a pipe that would not sort of spoil their vision or spoil the vision for the audience. So imagine it's much more convenient to have a pipe that's sort of like this and then curved, because you can actually look at everyone's face and no one gets too disturbed by the smoke and all that. Yeah. Next time you now look at the classic Sherlock Holmes villain, you can think that thing is basically a lie. Sherlock probably didn't look like that. Let's move on from destroying everyone's image of the great detective to Dr. Watson. A few facts, well, 2 facts actually, about Dr. Watson. And let's start with his name. So, everyone knows Dr. Watson's full name to be Dr. John Hamish Watson. Now, fact of the matter is, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle never specified Watson's second name to be Hamish. We do know that his initial is H. There are multiple occurrences where it says John H. Watson MD, that sort of thing. But we never actually find out what the initial H actually refers to, which is why, for example, in BBC Sherlock, we have this whole gag with Sherlock trying to find out what the initial H refers to, and we get all kinds of suggestions what the H could stand for. But we don't know that actually it is Hamish. So the origin of that is that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wasn't always great when it came to keeping up coherency with some facts, which is, for example, why we sometimes get Watson having gotten an injury during the war in the leg, and sometimes it's the shoulder. So sometimes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle mixed things up a bit. And apparently this happened to him with Watson's first name, because, and I have to look which story this is, in The Man with the Twisted Lip, we have a scene with Mary, Watson's wife, and Watson. They're having a conversation, and Mary refers to Watson as James. And this is where the confusion sort of starts. Sure, there have been speculations that maybe Mary wasn't actually addressing Watson, but referring to, I don't know, the butler or something like that. But in general, it's believed to be that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle maybe mixed things up, and Mary just happens to refer to Watson as James. And this is where the initial H finds its origin, because some people who like to play the game, or the Holmesian game, that sort of thing, which basically means trying to find out what kind of origins or details we can find out about Watson and Holmes' life as if they were real people. Some people have made speculations, and one of them was Dorothy L. Sayers, who speculates that the H could stand for Hamish, because Hamish is the Anglicanization of a Scottish Gaelic name, which I'm not going to try to pronounce here, but it's basically the Scottish Gaelic version of James, and that's where we get Hamish from. Because it seems very convenient. Sure, we have Mary referring to him as James at some point, and we have this initial H, that if you say, okay, Hamish sort of means James, and that's why she refers to him as James, or I don't know. But that's where we get this initial from. So, Hamish isn't actually a name Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself came up with. I mean, I don't know, it could be just as likely that he thought maybe John's second name is Henry. Maybe it's John Henry Watson. We don't know. But Hamish has become this stand-in for this middle initial H so far that it's now generally accepted to be Watson's middle name. I think it's accepted by even sort of the Sherlock Holmes societies that we know, definitely by the sort of fandom, and it's used most of the time as well in Sherlock Holmes adaptations, like the BBC adaptation, for example. So yeah, Watson gets his initial from a Scottish Gaelic translation that's not in the books, but I think it's a very, very cute name. Let's stick with Watson for our next fact. That's a more casual fact, namely that Watson was not married to only Mary Morstan. So Mary Morstan is Watson's wife. That's what everyone knows. Watson gets married and he gets to know Mary Morstan in The Sign of Four, and they move in together and they are a happy couple. And so far so good. But the thing is, Watson's wife, Mary, actually dies. It's not really explained how or why or it's just that in between stories, in the hiatus, in the time between the Reichenbach full story, The Final Problem, and Sherlock re-emerging in the empty house, Watson's wife has died in the meantime. So Mary Morstan has died in this 3-year gap, which is why Watson temporarily moves in with Sherlock again for some time. But then again, in later stories, Watson mentions that he has a wife again. She never gets a name. We're never introduced to her. There's never any greater detail to this new wife. But it is apparently a second wife. Of course, we could presume that maybe Sir Arthur Conan Doyle mixed up his facts again and forgot that he had actually killed Mary, or I don't know. But yeah, that's something I think a lot of people don't know, that Mary dies and Watson remarries, which is why, for example, spoilers for BBC Sherlock series 4, I guess, which is why I guess so many people were upset and angry when Mary died in that series, and I was like, I knew that would happen. I'm like, yeah, she's probably gonna die at some point because she dies in the stories. So, yeah, it would actually be kind of interesting to see an adaptation that maybe goes a bit more into this. That we have Mary, and sure, we get to see Watson being married to her, but then she dies and he remarries. BBC Sherlock sort of does that, and I guess a lot of adaptations also just have Watson fall in love with some random other women, where you could argue maybe that's the second wife. We don't know. But I think that's maybe like a part or a sub-story of Watson's character that doesn't get explored a whole lot, and that not a bunch of people know about. So there you go. Now, let's move on to some facts about our favourite detective, about Sherlock. And the first fact is that we celebrate Sherlock Holmes' birthday on the 6th of January, because it's generally believed that Sherlock Holmes' birthday was the 6th of January, 1854. Now, 1854 is pretty solid when it comes to finding evidence in the stories. However, this 6th of January, completely made up. This was never mentioned in the stories. So we know pretty much for sure that it was 1854 because in one of the last stories, which is set in 1914, it's mentioned that Sherlock Holmes looks like a man about 60 years of age, which is why we generally believe Sherlock Holmes to have been born in the year 1854. So that's sort of generally accepted because that's more or less in the books. But the 6th of January is completely made up by a chap whose name I don't want to get wrong because he's actually quite important, by a chap named Christopher Morley. Now, Christopher Morley was an American, was actually one of the founders of the Baker Street Irregulars, which is like the big Sherlock Holmes society in America. And he pretty much just came up with it because he liked it. So I think he bases this on the fact that Sherlock Holmes quotes a Shakespeare play twice, and I think it's the 12th Night that he quotes in some of the stories. So Christopher Morley sort of based this on the idea of, okay, so Sherlock Holmes' birthday is the 12th night of Christmas. or something like that, which makes the date of his birth the 6th of January. And that's it. That's pretty much it. And this is a theory that has basically become very popular. It's so popular and widespread that it's generally accepted nowadays, even though it is not to be found anywhere in the original canon. I myself do celebrate Sherlock Holmes' birthday on the 6th of January because, you know, it's nice. It's just it's a nice thing to do, and a lot of adaptations also take the 6th of January to be Sherlock Holmes' birthday, like again the BBC version or the Guy Ritchie version as well. They usually use the 6th of January 1854, if it's Victorian times, as Sherlock's birthday. And honestly, I think it's kind of nice to just have this day, even though it's not in the canon whatsoever. But I guess with this kind of popularity in regards to this character, it's nice to sort of have this day where everyone can celebrate together and celebrate this great man. But strictly speaking, it's not confirmed and it's not in the books. Fact number 6 I want to talk about is something I have spoken about many times, and this mostly serves the people who are maybe really only on surface level familiar with the stories. It namely concerns Irene Adler. I want to specify the fact that Sherlock Holmes and Irene Adler were not a couple, ever, and were most likely never ever in love with each other. I'm saying most likely because I want to leave it open to interpretation for people who read the stories and think maybe they were in love. But the fact of the matter is they were never a couple. And they never met again. So a lot of people think that Irene is like this big important character, and she is, but that she like appears in multiple stories, or that she's mentioned again after her initial appearance, or that maybe Sherlock and her spend elaborate times together or whatever. But no, Irene appears in one canonical story, namely A Scandal in Bohemia, and she never appears again after that story. She leaves quite a significant impact on Sherlock, which is why Irene Adler enjoys such great significance within the greater Sherlock Holmes fandom. But within the story, it is mentioned, of course, by Watson, who tells us the story, that Sherlock didn't feel anything like love for her, but that he certainly respected and admired her because it was the first time he had been defeated by a woman. But within the story, Irene does not fall in love with Sherlock. In fact, she gets married to another man and then runs away with him. Sherlock actually witnesses the marriage and he's fine with it. And he sort of just keeps her memory as this woman to sort of disprove his very sexist idea of women. But they never enter any kind of romantic or sexual relationship, nothing like that. And I think a lot of people don't know that, especially if they are only familiar with like modern day adaptations of the Irene Adler character. If you like look at stories like the Guy Ritchie movies, where you know you have this very classic romantic sexual relationship thing going on between Irene Adler and Sherlock, which is not in the book whatsoever, and or like in the BBC version where she falls in love with him and that's why she loses the game against him. Nothing like that. It's nothing like that. And I want people to know that yes, she is important. She is important, but she is important because she's more like this feminist icon who's able to change Sherlock Holmes' perspective of women, and not different because they fall in love with each other and have a relationship. That's, strictly speaking, not what is in the story. And the last thing I want to talk about, fact number 7, is the siblings and the true meaning of Sherrinford. So this is maybe not like one single fact, but maybe a whole bunch of little facts thrown together, which is sort of a misconception that has appeared because of many different types of adaptations that have been made throughout the years, also in recent years, as we see in the BBC Sherlock adaptation. So when it comes to siblings, there's always been this very popular idea that Sherlock and Mycroft are not the only Holmes siblings, but that there was maybe also a third Holmes sibling. So we see this, for example, as I said, in the BBC Sherlock version, where we have the introduction of a sister, Euros. However, we also have a mention of the name Sherrinford. And Sherrinford, I think, has a very interesting origin. So the name Sherrinford in some adaptations and some prestige stories is used as a name for a third Holmes sibling. However, originally the name Sherrinford was Sherlock Holmes's first name. So when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle came up with the concept of the character Sherlock Holmes, he initially wanted to give him the first name Sherrinford, but then later scrapped it and decided on and picked the name Sherlock. So in some parallel universe, we would maybe read the stories of Sherrinford Holmes. It would be Sherrinford Holmes and Dr. Watson. It would be the Adventures of Sherrinford Holmes, which, honestly speaking, still sounds absolutely amazing. It's a really cool name. But yeah, so the name sort of stuck around, and many people who sort of concern themselves with the analysis and interpretation of the Sherlock Holmes canon took this name and have used it for all kinds of different interpretations, but I think the most popular, famous one is the one of attaching this name to a third Holmes sibling. So this sort of finds its origin again with Sherlock Holmes academics who play the Holmesian game, sort of trying to find out what the family background of Sherlock Holmes could be. And it's a man, before I get the name wrong, by the name of William Baring-Gould, who wrote a very influential sort of official biography of Sherlock Holmes, and he sort of theorized all kinds of background stories and ideas for the detective. And I don't want to get this wrong, which is why I'm reading from my notes. And he came up with a bunch of different things. Like, he came up with the names for Sherlock Holmes' parents, that they're called Seeker Holmes and Violet Sherrinford. Names that he took basically from nowhere. He sort of tried to explain it with some references in the canon, which could be interpreted in multiple kinds of ways. So, since in the canon it is said that Sherlock's family was based sort of on, is it country squires or something like that? So they have some kind, have a little bit of land or something like that, and he basically, Baring-Gould basically came up with this third Holmes sibling, so Mycroft and Sherlock have an excuse to just hang around in London and do their thing, and not having to take over the family business heritage, basically. So he came up with, Sherrinford Holmes, and Mycroft is basically the middle brother, and Sherlock is the youngest brother in this theory. But like I said, this is not true at all, and I know that it's quite a popular idea if you sort of look at other adaptations or prestige stories, that, you know, this idea of a third sibling, or, you know, Sherrinford, is thrown around a lot. I do remember, for example, when series 4 of Sherlock was on, and in one of the episodes before we actually meet the sister, Mycroft gets a phone call or something. I don't remember the scene exactly, and he says, Sherrinford should be safe. And I remember having a complete freak out, because I was like, oh no, they're introducing the idea of a third sibling, which wasn't actually in the books, but is a quite popular idea. Then I was sort of relieved, because I was like, oh, okay, so Sherrinford is just the prison. It's just like a fun reference. And then they were like, oh no, there is a third sibling. It's just a sister. She has a different name. And I was like, what? Why? Not saying that it can't be done. I'm just saying that I tend to be very sort of purist when it comes to Sherlock Holmes adaptations, and I want them to be as close to the canon as possible, which is why when this idea of a third Holmes siblings introduced, I'm usually like, not sure about that, because that's not in the books. But yeah, just so you know, it is a popular idea, and I think a lot of people, also especially due to like something like the BBC adaptation, maybe think that yeah, there is actually a third Holmes sibling, or Sherrinford might be some kind of secret family member or something. But no, that's not actually true. We don't actually know a whole lot about Sherlock's family or his heritage. We know very, very few details about that. I might talk about that in a later video. So if anyone tries to tell you that Sherrinford is a third sibling, or there is a third sibling, no, not true. Not in the stories. Okay, so those were my 7 facts that are usually believed to be true when it comes to Sherlock Holmes, but actually aren't. Maybe I was able to provide you with some new information. I certainly hope that I could introduce some people out there to the Sherlock Holmes canon who sort of want to get into it, and maybe this sort of helps you gain an entrance or first knowledge when it comes to the detective. I definitely would love to do more like sort of maybe trivia facts about the stories or the characters or the author, whatever. If there's anything like that that you would like to hear about, if there are like character details you would like me to talk about when it comes to Sherlock Holmes stories, or maybe you would just want me to sort of make information videos, because I've honestly thought about that as well, just sort of do like a Sherlock Holmes 101 thing where I introduce you to the stories and the canon, etc., sort of just providing information. Yeah, if there's anything like that you would like to see, put it down in the comments. I definitely look forward to reading some of your suggestions or some of your thoughts that you have on the facts I presented you with. Naturally, if you have some facts yourself that you think a lot of people believe about Sherlock Holmes but aren't actually true, put them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. So, I hope you liked it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and above all subscribe if you haven't done it already. And I see all of you next time. Goodbye.